Yeah, it's the uncertainty of it. Are you mostly at home, Gina?
This is my home.
Yeah, but all activities at home.
Yeah, I haven't been back to Babson since a year ago last March. So I'm going to start going back in June.
It's the same. Ok.
Professora, a gente já está online.
Tá. Então, acho que pode focar nela. Isso, legal. Ok. Bom, primeiro em português aí para todo mundo. Obrigado pela presença. Nós vamos ter uma atividade com a professora Gina O'Connor. Ela não entende português tão bem quanto vocês, alguma coisa ela vai entender, mas vamos fazer uma atividade dentro de uma aula da disciplina de pós-graduação, Gestão Estratégica da Inovação. Então, essa atividade está desenhada para os alunos que estão seguindo regularmente o curso, mas como teve isso, a gente ficou sabendo e tal, nós vamos fazer uma transmissão em secundária, que já está acontecendo, né? Para vocês, os demais, pelo menos, poderem assistir, mas para não atrapalhar aqui a aula, não vai ser possível ter uma interação direta, tá? Qualquer coisa que vocês queiram, etc., a gente pode encaminhar posteriormente, ok? Então, principalmente o pessoal que não está aqui no Zoom. Bom, vamos lá. Ok, let's start for a minute. Gina, thank you very much for your presence to be here with us. I'd like to introduce you, Professor Gina O'Connor. Well, she will speak a bit of her career, but she's the most important researcher on radical innovation management. She's completely outstanding and has a long, outstanding work on the subject. First, at the RPI, it's Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. It's quite difficult to the pronunciation of Rensselaer. Nobody knows how to say it, but it's a Dutch name as far as I could understand. And now she's at Babson College near Boston. Okay, but Gina, the room is yours. Okay. Please take the lead.
Thank you, Mario. I really have no idea what he said before. So, do I should I speak slowly? Is there a translation happening, or people are going to try to understand the English?
No, in English.
In English.
No translation, yeah.
Okay, so if I start talking too fast, raise your hand or signal in some way. And happy to take questions. But Mario, if you watch the chat, because I don't pay as much attention to that when I'm presenting. Okay. Yeah, but Mario and I and his research group, you go back a number of years now and have become very good friends and collaborate on a number of projects and papers and visit one another. So it's been great, and I'm happy to meet all of you and see some of you again. So let me just share my screen, and I have a lot of material. I don't know if you want to stop me for clarifying, questions that where you don't understand what I'm saying. Then let's do that, and then maybe we can hold off till the end on for the discussion. Let's see, let me just get this straight first.
Okay.
Yeah, you can see me, and now I have to make sure I can see you on my other screen. It always takes a minute.
No, the screen's okay in green. It's okay.
Yeah. All right, and now I want to put this in the right kind of a view mode. Okay, all set? That's good? Okay. Okay, so what we'll do is really talk about this from, it's a bit of a mix of the practical issues that we learned over the course of our research study, and then really a consideration from a scholarly perspective, what we're contributing to from a theoretical perspective. And I'm not going to get into too much detail on any single particular paper or anything. I mean, I think the whole reason that Mario wanted you to hear what we're doing is because the nature of this research program, it's just been a long program, and I've been so lucky to have been involved in it. You know, I was a struggling young PhD candidate that had a sort of interesting question in her dissertation, but it got pretty boring pretty quickly, and was able to get on the train essentially of this research program because of a really visionary dean that we had at RPI, who wanted to have notoriety for a very small business school, which is what we were, on a particular topic of interest to companies, but that will also be aligned with a technological university, which was what Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute was. And so part of this is just by sheer luck, but I totally fell in love with this question because it's a very, very important question to the global economy, but also to people who work in large corporate settings and are very frustrated by their jobs, and the communities that surround them frequently bear the consequences of the failures that they experience as they try to create their new paths of growth. So this will be a bit of a mix between the practical, managerial, and the more theoretical side of things. So, the nature of the problem, we started off by saying companies have been terrible at managing for breakthrough innovation, but they had gotten much better in the 1980s and the 1990s at managing incremental new product development. And I think Mario shared with me that you've read about the stage gate approach, and you probably know now, Agile. There's all these like sort of cool processes to essentially meet customers' needs quickly and stay, one step ahead of the competition. And better, faster, cheaper is kind of what that environment is about. But what we see when you kind of take a step back about large, mature companies is that on an average, these are data all from Fortune 1000 or Fortune 500 companies, where scholars have tracked their survival rates over periods of time. And today it's even worse. The survival rates are even shorter. But on an average, here at the bottom of the screen, that the average life expectancy of a multinational corporation is shorter than the lifespan of a human being. And there's actually no reason why that should occur, because we've got norms and processes and routines and brand name and big investments globally now. That's what these large companies have, is these huge footprints and networks and assets. And yet we cannot manage to continue to renew ourselves to stay relevant to the economy. And this happens across industries. So when Clayton Christensen published his initial work around disruptive innovation, he focused on the disk drive industry and then the steel mini mill industry. But over time, you track this, it's actually happening in Mario and my industry right now. The university education, the traditional methods, the traditional price points, the traditional ways that we have taught are completely being disrupted. And all of that has been accelerated by the COVID pandemic, actually. So there's in every single industry, from services to heavy capital equipment requirements, all have to really concern themselves with managing the health of their future at the same time that they're managing the health of their present. So what we had observed early on in this research program is that companies don't really have we were calling it radical innovation back then, moved to breakthrough innovation. Now we call it strategic innovation, and I'll show you why over time. But what we were seeing with companies whose names are well recognized in the United States, it's DuPont or Corning or General Electric. Every once in a while, about every 10 years, there'd be a breakthrough that the world would know about that had not just in the R&D lab, but that had actually created a whole new platform of growth, a new business unit, if you will, for the company. And those were great folklore that these companies told these stories all the time. And there was always a hero scientist, an R&D scientist who started all of this. But they were sporadic. So it's a single project. It may be a breakthrough. And these occur not with any kind of system underlying them or anything other than a champion who continues to push and push and push till they get senior leaders' attention. Senior leaders will kind of protect them so that they can break all the rules of the organization. Because if you follow the rules of the organization, if you follow the stage gate process and you have to prove certain market size and certain financial returns, every single time those projects will be killed coming out of gate 0, gate 1, because it's too ambiguous yet. We believe we have something that will change the game in the future, and we want to continue to invest to develop that opportunity, but that's not the way the traditional routines work. So we find these people who are breaking all the rules, and they're protected by senior sponsors, but when the sponsor leaves or somehow moves to a different location in the company, this whole initiative loses its protection, and the company has wasted a lot of energy and a lot of time, and the initiative itself, never makes it to the marketplace. And so there's a lot of missed opportunities that result. There's no way that the company develops an expertise over time. They're not learning from one experience to the next. And even now, when we have these kind of new processes, lean startup and minimum viable product and all of those sorts of things that were generated for the use in the software as a service industry and in the startup world, we try to apply those into the large corporate setting. We are still missing a lot of addressing the barriers that prevent these breakthroughs from making it forward. So I'll talk a little bit about that first in a bit. So you've read about the concept of ambidexterity, I believe, in your class. And so you understand it was Duncan first who identified it, and then Michael Tushman and group at Harvard really kind of fleshed out this idea that we have to have the mainstream organization that's the core business, and then some mechanism for exploring and for creating the new stream organizations. And so it's not just exploring. There's much more of a discipline to actually moving forward to create the new streams of growth that are the new businesses. So when you look at this slide, what you see is all the differences in how you have to manage and the kinds of cognitive mindsets and you can imagine the different kinds of skills that are required to be more comfortable working and creating in the mainstream, and how different that is for people being comfortable and working in the new stream. And so, it's not about risk management and only going where the likelihood of success is the greatest in the known customer and known technology roadmap market, which is what the mainstream is, where our whole idea is objective is to reduce variation and make everything 100% predictable and aligned with current customer needs. That's different from what we're looking for, where we're trying to expand the possibility set of opportunities. And some of them are just imagined. We might find a patent somewhere in a university lab, for example, or not, or just it's not even been patented yet. An invention of some sort, and you can start to imagine all the possible opportunities that this could enable, of course, matched with a variety of other technologies. And that's quite threatening to the mainstream organization, typically. because the business models will be disrupted. It could be that the current markets are destroyed. The competencies that we've been so good at developing and improving over time will become obsoleted in many cases by a number of the competencies. You know, look at everything that's happening with artificial intelligence and big data today, and how much obsolescence is occurring in terms of the kinds of people that are working, for example, on customer service phone calls and, you know, all kinds of things. So these things are very, very threatening in organizations. And what we have seen in the you know, in the kind of the real world, the research that has tracked the ways that companies have gone about creating these news streams, is that it's been very much a stop and start mentality. So about every 10, maybe 12 years, a company leader will change over and say, we need game changers. We need moonshots. We need rockets. They've all got kind of their term for what it is we need, because we realize we're not going to get to our growth objectives by the incremental improvements that are taking place in the business units. And if we buy companies to grow through acquisition, that works in a temporary way, but typically what we find is the companies pay huge price premiums for those and then do not benefit in the long run from those large kinds of acquisitions. So anyway, on an average, we find that these new initiatives last 4 to 5 years, and then they are defunded. The portfolio of opportunities that we've been experimenting with and have begun to learn more about is typically then scattered throughout the business units, where they're starved for resources. All the things we've learned about the kinds of processes that work for this high uncertainty stuff, we forget because the people leave the organization. And so that's been sort of the history of how this has unfolded. More recently, with open innovation and the way corporates are engaging with startups, that part is having some more staying power. But that's only around getting cool technology. It's not about building the whole new stream business. So at least we're beginning to kind of solidify on that particular practice. So we find even in the financial markets, you know, we find a lot of criticism of pension funds, wealth management advisors, CEOs and boards of directors who have what, you know, is called a short-term perspective, because they make their incentive compensation, or, you know, people in the stock market make quick returns by flipping stocks, as we've seen recently with the Robinhood issues, if you've been tracking that. It doesn't even have anything to do with the fundamentals of business any longer. So we are really, you know, divorced from the company actually doing a good job and serving as stockholders in that manner. But in fact, what we're starting to see are these people who have huge wealth advisory funds, Larry Fink being the one who manages BlackRock, which is the largest wealth advisory fund. So all these people invest money with him, and then his group is supposed to invest it in companies that are going to make us, his clients, a lot of money. And he basically writes a letter every year to the top leaders of the Fortune, whatever it is, companies. And it's always challenging. Every year his letter challenges them to some new management objective. And 5 years ago, he wrote this letter in which he's basically saying, you all tell me that you don't want to operate along a short-term return perspective, and yet you do. You keep doing it. And that means that I don't have anywhere to invest the billions of dollars that I control. I could be investing in you to help you do innovation, because it will return back good money to my shareholders over time. But I can't find any of you who are willing to really take those risks. So figure it out, you guys, and learn how to do it, and start to become more transparent to shareholders about the types of investments that you are making. So even these excuses, I think there's a huge research opportunity for scholars who are interested in the connection of financial markets and marketing or messaging about innovation. How do we begin to communicate what our innovation investments are to stock market analysts so that we don't take this constant hit on share price associated with this. Okay, so that's kind of the nature of the problem that we were looking at long ago. And the question is, how do you address that? So from a scholarly perspective, we weren't trying to test a theory. You know, typically you have a theory, you're going to test it in a certain context. And so you've got hypotheses, which you confirm or whatever, disconfirm, et cetera. But we were really looking at a phenomenon. You know, how do large companies manage for breakthrough innovation? And so it's going to leverage many theories. We're going to have to bring many theories to bear, and we're going to develop a theory about how this could work. And then that theory can become one that is tested with other more quantitative techniques. It's also a multidisciplinary problem. And so when we got the grant, we got a big grant from the Sloan Foundation to study this phenomenon. And the dean assembled a group of 10 of us, each of us coming from a different discipline. So my background was in marketing. We had a managerial accounting professor. We had an electrical engineering professor. We had people in organizational behavior. We had people in strategy, entrepreneurship, finance, a variety of R&D management, different disciplines. And so the discussions among our faculty team after we would conduct interviews or visits to each of these companies caused us to come to kind of a common view of what was occurring in those companies. And it really enriched the way we thought about it. Because to me, I think of everything as a marketing issue. And it's simply, you know, I was informed by colleagues and through much debate about other angles on the problem. And then finally, it was a longitudinal study. There are 3 studies, all 3 of them are longitudinal and what you call prospective, which means we started with companies who were just beginning some breakthrough innovation projects, and we watched as they went forward in real time. We didn't say, tell us about your most successful breakthrough innovation and then do a case history. It was watching the challenges that those teams experienced during the time that they were experiencing them that we really got some very useful and made, you know, insights that you might not get if somebody tells you all the good stuff that happened, you know, 5 years after. They don't tell you the bad stuff. So we got a really good look at all of that. So this is the 3 phases of the research program. And so in the first phase of the work, it was studying projects that senior technical leaders identified as having the possibility of being breakthroughs. They were just early discoveries or had been worked on for 3 or 4 years in the labs. But it really was starting to look like there was a lot of opportunity there. So we had 12 projects that we traced over a 5-year period of time, and we interviewed those teams intermittently, semi-annually to annually, because there wasn't, you know, so much change in what was happening. So we didn't have to interview them every week. It wasn't that dynamic. But then in the second phase of the work, you know, we came up with some conclusions, which I'll show you, and some hypotheses about how companies could get better at doing this from a sustained capability point of view, not just one project. So that's when we launched the second phase of the research project. And that was all around, you know, how do you build this organizational capability? And what are all the issues that companies who are trying to do this over and over again are contending with? And so that was 12 companies that volunteered into that study who had a declared strategic intent to improve their capability for breakthrough innovation. And then another group of companies used to come to our university and serve as like a validation set of companies. It was, again, prospective, longitudinal, multidisciplinary team. We also conducted some survey research there and had some secondary data. I'll show you some of that. And then of all of those elements of a management system that we believed could really help to institutionalize a sustained capability for breakthrough innovation, it still wasn't happening. It still wasn't occurring in many companies by the time we finished the observation. And what we noticed is that one of the most critical tripping up points, challenges, was the issue of talent management. So that was one of the elements that we questioned them about every time we spoke with them. Who have you hired? Why? Who's engaged in doing what? How are you deciding if their performance is successful or not, given all the uncertainty, et cetera? And what we found is that the R&D scientists, career-wise, they were safe. It didn't matter if the project succeeded or failed. They were following the scientific method. They were conducting the research according to, the recognized processes. But the new business creation, entrepreneurial type, might be a new business development person in R&D, for example. Those people, their careers were at risk. Their careers were at risk. If those projects did not turn into something that was revenue producing within an interesting, time frame. Melania, hi. So I see Mario's daughter there. So at any rate, then if the company in particular was facing some financial stress, which many do, at various points, it's those people that got redeployed or in fact laid off or demoted. And there was no way that those people who were so passionate about becoming entrepreneurs and building the business in partnership with the scientists, et cetera, they love that work, but there was no career path available to them unless they cycled back out into the business units and took on a typical project in a mainstream organization. So we wanted to try to learn, how can we break through that challenge? How can we address that challenge? And that's what the third phase was. So these were the companies that we studied. I think you'll receive these slides so you can have a closer look. Most of them are US based. In the third phase, we had a couple of European based companies. All of them are global companies. Some of them don't exist today in their original form. Which is not unexpected given the data that I showed you earlier. But they're all big, well-known companies that have billions of dollars of revenue annually, and many divisions, and are globally represented. And most of them compete on the basis of technological innovation. So we had, as I said, a multidisciplinary team. In the first phase, number of faculty from RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, a couple of PhD students, and then we partnered together with the Industrial Research Institute, which is a professional organization of R&D managers and directors. And so they set up a committee to work with us. And so that was a very fun time. By the time we got down to writing the book, only 6 faculty remained on the team for different various reasons. Some cycled off. They all got papers out of it, but they did not remain as closely connected to stay on the book. The second phase, it was some of the same faculty, 4 of the same faculty remained, and then I started to expand the faculty. By then I was leading the program, and we had some faculty actually from Babson College and one from a neighboring school in upstate New York. More PhD students joined us, and again, we worked together with the Industrial Research Institute. By the time we got to the third phase, it was a reduced number of faculty because the problem wasn't as multidisciplinary. It was all around talent management. And so there were 3 of us who had worked very closely together for a period of time. And then for other kinds of papers and adjacent kinds of questions that came out, we added one faculty member from Kobe University in Japan. So that's kind of the mix of people, and so it's just been, very rewarding from that perspective. There's been a lot of outcomes. I think Mario sent you, a list of the papers, which I haven't updated for a couple of years, so there's a few more coming out. But it's the way to have an impact with this kind of a research program, if you get lucky enough to come onto a question that is so important and so compelling to people in practice, this is a wonderful opportunity for us. So there's a lot of, we wrote the books in each phase before we actually started to write the paper, because the book forces you to distill it into what are the main points of learning here. You know, you don't have to go through all the writing of the literature review and the theory and all the stuff that we had put into academic papers. So the books, a number of scholarly papers, many of which have won awards, a number of papers in, you know, Harvard Business Review and other kinds that are not peer-reviewed journals. And then we actually started to teach this by developing a specialized master's program at RPI, and we are now developing one at Babson as well on corporate innovation. And also, as we began to get inquiries from companies, we began to develop tools and frameworks that would help them try this out. And so that has been a big learning experience as well, because as they try to put the principles and tools in place, it causes us to learn a lot more about whether or not our theories are right and if it works or doesn't work. And so that then stimulates more research questions. So this was the original definition of breakthrough innovation that the guys at the Industrial Research Institute told us was meaningful for them. We had to come up with a way of defining it or operationalizing it so that they could identify projects that we would be able to study, that we would all have a common definition of what we were studying. Really important if you're studying a phenomenon. You've got to have a definition that everybody agrees to. So this was in the very beginning, when we were looking at projects, they identified projects for us that they said had the potential for significant strategic impact by offering new to the world performance features, or significant performance improvement in a known feature, or a dramatic reduction in cost. And those last two, the ranges would vary depending on the industry and the technology that you were in. But the point was, it would open up whole new use cases, new application spaces, so you could create new markets and new business models on the basis of this innovation. And then a breakthrough innovation capability was the ability to manage a portfolio of these opportunities so that it was happening over and over again, not just the one project. So in the first phase, one of the types of analysis, and you know, all of our data was interview data, depth interview data. So doing the interviews was exhausting. Transcribing the interviews, you know, finally we figured out a way to get that paid for. And then just reading all those pages of interviews and analyzing the qualitative data, you know, it requires a lot of discipline, and it was very helpful to have to go back to the IRI twice a year and provide them with new insights that we had learned. So those due dates were very, very useful for us. So, but one of the sets of analysis we did was what you see here, which was we mapped the life cycle of each of the projects. So this is one that's particularly dramatic. We did this for all 12 projects, where you know, we mapped how much resources it had, what were some of the discontinuities, the surprises or the shocks that occurred. That's what each of these little D's stand for. The resources are the thickness of the line. So at one point, this project was on 1/2 of one full-time equivalent person was keeping that project alive. Every time this line drops down, the project moved to a different location in the company. So over the time that we were observing it, it moved in and out of 4 different divisions at DuPont, and every single time it began to get under-resourced because the use cases that were relevant to that division were too limited. But overall, the whole domain of opportunity was a big one. You know, obviously they knew that biodegradable polyester, that's what this Biomax was going to be a very big, important thing as the world needed more efforts in sustainability. And then each of these arrows were co-development, beta testing arrangements that they had with different market partners, so that they were beginning to test whether it worked and the extent to which value was perceived. The reason that it never really lost legitimacy in the company was there was one new business development guy in central R&D who kept rescuing this project. Every time that it was in a business unit and it was getting under-resourced, he pulled it back in, and he had a team of 6 people, and they would help find these market partners. And so over time, Biomax became the lead product in a whole new division that DuPont started on bio-based materials. So it was the first of a whole family of products. In and of itself, Biomax never generated, $1 billion of revenue. It may have generated $200 million of revenue, but it stimulated the development of this entire family of products, which ultimately became a new stream for the company. But out of this analysis, with this one and the other projects that we studied, we realized that there are really these 4 dimensions of uncertainty. And most conventional literature was telling us that breakthrough innovation is where there's high technical uncertainty and high market uncertainty. But we also found that there was resource uncertainty and organizational uncertainty. So by resource uncertainty, it's not just the funding, but it's the staffing with people, and it's actually getting access to new competencies, usually technical capabilities and market access that the company didn't have before because they'd never really operated in that market space before. And so partnerships, which today happen on a regular basis, but then were not happening, in every one of our projects, there were co-development partnerships and those kinds of arrangements. The organizational uncertainty is the one that really killed these projects off. And so they're the ones that leaders that thought they were committed to the project changed their strategy. A leader in a business unit who says, I'm ready to adopt this when you guys are ready to transition it over, they'll change their mind. There's not necessarily a natural home for it, so we need to set up a new division sometimes, as in the case of Biomax. There's just so many things that happen in terms of organizational politics, and these project leaders are not prepared to handle those. But if we can start to think of it as the natural course of project management, to have all these 4 dimensions of uncertainty, and then you begin to surface those and start to hypothesis test around those and get help where you need it from the political dimension, it causes things to go much more smoothly when it's time for really investing money to scale up these new businesses. But we found that these uncertainties really drove a whole host of challenges for the project leaders. And we thought the biggest problem was going to be getting big ideas. That's what this chapter 1 in this book is about, capturing big ideas. That's not the problem at all. Everybody had a lot of ideas. Putting them into the big, compelling ones, that became a bit of an issue. This one is all about how do you do project management when you have so much variability and uncertainty. Challenge 3 was, how do you learn about markets that don't exist yet today? You can't do voice of the customer and traditional market research. Business model, what should the business model be? Where would we operate on the value chain with this new potential innovation? How do we get the right resources that we need? It might not be the issue of not having enough. The issue is having the right ones. And then how do we ultimately transition this thing into an operating unit so that it can become part of the mainstream? That became a very big issue. And then what are the roles of various people who have been helping us, and how do we kind of figure that part of it out? Those were all the challenges that we saw. So at the end of the phase 1, we had examined really a lot of different elements of the phenomenon of breakthrough innovation at a project level. And there's papers written on every one of these, and they're kind of in the list that you may have received. And so we were really able to learn an awful lot and contribute from that perspective in terms of what we know as a, from a management scholar point of view about the project level of breakthrough innovation in companies today. And if you think about the theories and disciplines that we've pulled from and then hopefully contributed to, you can just see there's this long list. And so when everybody, I always get these comments from reviewers, which is, what's your theoretical framework? Like, you're supposed to operate within one theoretical framework, and it's extremely frustrating to try to convince reviewers that, this is a phenomenon. And so we always say we're developing our own theory, and then we just try to make points of connection to various other theories. But many scholars won't do that because they don't want to learn more than one theory. And you can, like, I've been trying to get a paper into organization science where we're proving that our 3 competencies, discovery, incubation, and acceleration, are routines. So I had to learn all about routines theory. Well, then your reviewers are all people who are the leaders of that theory. They hated this work because it completely blew apart, everything they've been trying to protect. So it's a small community that uses those theories. And I finally went to a different co-author, and he basically said, we'll never get in if you try to go the routines way, because that little scholarly community is so tightly knit. So these are the politics of, like, our industry on scholarship. So now we're taking it in terms of dynamic capabilities and competencies, not routines. So whatever, I don't care. I just want people to be able to read it and to learn from what we're learning. Okay, are there any questions before I move on to the second phase of the work? No, everybody's, all right, just keep moving. All right, so in the second phase, as I mentioned to you, now we had kind of seen what the project manager, project leader was experiencing and the challenges that they faced. And we had seen in 2 of the companies, these like infrastructure support people of new business development or new ventures groups that actually, had few projects that they were working on that they were helping move forward. And one was in DuPont, the guy that kept saving the Biomax project and taking it, and he had 6 people. And we came to this conclusion that that's really cool to have a group that is tightly connected to R&D. They're not an outpost. Clayton Christensen at that time was saying this cannot happen in large organizations. But we had to kind of understand, these new ventures groups don't last that long. So what's the problem? And so we wanted to test out how companies were trying to build the capability. So these are the elements of the management system that organization theory will tell you are important, and that they've all got to be in alignment in order for any organization to function effectively. And primarily they're driven by what is the mandate or the objective for that organization. So we took that theory and we said, how would a management system for a breakthrough innovation capability look? And we developed interview protocols that asked about each of these elements. And we interviewed people who were responsible for evolving the breakthrough innovation capability in their companies. Every 6 months, we interviewed them. And then we also interviewed the people to whom they reported, which were generally very senior leaders at the corporate level. And then we also interviewed the people that reported to them. So who were the staff members that were really trying to make this portfolio work? So just like we mapped the timelines of the projects where I showed you the Biomax timeline, in this case, over time, we started to notice how much fluidity, how much change there was in the organizational structure. They would hold on to their projects longer. They would change some of the practices. They would add people to their groups. And they would even start to change some of their mandates, their claimed mandates. And so we started to draw representations of different companies, organizations for breakthrough innovation and how those may have changed over time. So this was how most of them started out. They were idea generators. They had a little group, a radical innovation or a breakthrough innovation group, whose job was really to facilitate idea management, send out calls for proposals, go through those, maybe scout around in the R&D labs, and then come up with these ideas. And then there was a board that would decide which ones we're going to move forward on. And so there'd be a small group that might hold and work on some of those, like the one in DuPont that I mentioned. But most of them, they would shoot the ideas over to the business units. And in every case, they did not gain traction. You know, the business units had their own plan for new product development. They had, and it was all filled up. And so these things mostly just died a slow death, these ideas. But some of them more unaligned, where there was not an obvious fit with the business unit, a little business development group would hold on to it and try to do some work on finding some potential markets. So over time, those became the more interesting projects. And as we interviewed these companies, many of them said, you know, essentially the aligned opportunities go now straight to the business units, but we're mostly supposed to work on those that the business units would not pick up on because they're not necessarily going to fit with their current customers. So they would begin to develop these councils, like a governance council, that helped to identify those types of projects that the senior leaders, you know, thought was important for our company's future. And they would keep those white space, they called them, the white space businesses, and try to commercialize them themselves from within R&D. And we have examples of places where that happened because there was no business unit willing to invest to grow that. And so that took place for a period of time, and there was not very much staff associated with this. So it was just a few projects, and they were dragging on for long, long periods of time. We did see in 2 cases a situation where they got a lot more formalized about it. And so they had a group called the Alpha Team that was a new business discovery idea generation group, a group called the New Business Incubation Team that coached project teams. This group had about 70 people in their innovation hub, and they populated these teams, you know, to actually try to work on those ideas that were always being overseen by a middle management council. And then those that really began to get traction, they did fund what they called an accelerator, which is different than the way we use that term today. This was a little place where businesses that looked like they really were gaining traction would be funded to actually grow to be to the point of being able to compete with other businesses in the business unit for resources. So we did not send these over to the business unit until they had reached a certain level of maturity. And it was at that point when something was going into their new business accelerator that the senior leadership team, the CEO, the COO, and the CFO got involved in making those decisions because the funding came from them to do this. So there were all these other structures, and I won't spend a lot of time on them, but you know, we mapped, this one was IBM's structure when they were putting in place their Emerging Business Opportunities Group program. This one, which we called the mirror model, was GE's structure, where they did a lot of this discovery and some early vetting in the R&D group. But then the business unit that was supposed to pull that business was informed of it very strategically. The president of the business unit was forced to do this, and he would begin making acquisitions and preparing his organization to receive this new stream and really make it successful. And they were funded to do that. after we analyzed all those, and there were several others that I'm not showing you because they didn't have as much influence on our thinking, but we started to realize that it really boiled out to these three kinds of bits of work that has to get done: discovery and incubation and acceleration. And that's why, you know, these little groups that we were studying kept holding on to the projects, because if they sent them off to a business unit too early, we would never get the scale of a whole business platform, and they would be, you know, under leveraged. So I want to just review a little bit about, you know, we kind of made these terms up, and, you know, everybody uses different terms. And nobody told us, hey, we have discovery, incubation, and acceleration. We just kind of observed what was happening, and then we imposed this framework, if you will, on the work to be done in order for breakthroughs to actually occur. The other part about it is that we realized the elements of the management system that I showed you before, they've got to be designed to fit with what that work to be done actually is. So you would never really use the same metrics for a discovery portfolio as you would use for an acceleration portfolio. You don't even want to use the same people, because the kinds of talent that you need is quite different between discovery and incubation and acceleration. All of these things differ. And so somebody's got to be designing all that and making sure it's healthy. And that's what this little picture down here is. This is not a witch or a magician. This is supposed to be an orchestrator who is ensuring that all of the instruments are playing at the right time and that it's all working together as a system. Then the other part of it is that if you can start to think about these as organizational capabilities that interlock as a system, now what we start to see is that, you know, the company, its environment is constantly changing. We'll have internal change, the very dynamic change, a new CEO who refocuses a strategy, a really bad quarter, you know, from a financial perspective, all these different kinds of things, or issues that come at the company from the outside. Somebody sues us, or we have a lawsuit, or there's huge global economic expansion. And then there's these other influences that are more slow to change. And we've got to understand that we can't fully be investing at all times in breakthrough innovation. We have to be able to kind of tune our investments to the capacity of the company to absorb them, right? But we never want to completely defund it. We want it to always be present. We want to be able to continuously improve what we're doing, but we might slow down the pace of the portfolio or trim down the portfolio over time. So when we think about discovery, like I said, it's creating and identifying opportunities that could have big impact in the market, right? Bringing whole new orders of magnitude of value to the marketplace. The consequence of that then is that our company will benefit financially. And it's not the same thing as invention, and it's not the same thing as R&D. It's more than that. And so it requires business and entrepreneurial thinking. So there is the scientific work that has to happen, but there's also the generation of the opportunities. You know, how do you find the need in the market with what the delivery could be? And then there's a whole skill set around how we articulate these opportunities in a way that senior leaders find exciting. And most scientists are terrible at doing that. And we observed a number of R&D leaders taking opportunities to, you know, the big corporate executive committee and talking in all this scientific specifics. And these guys would just, you know, not be able to react. And so having a person, a set of people who have more of the business acumen be part of the discovery activity is crucially important to be able to really tilt up these opportunities. So I won't go through all this, but for each of discovery and incubation and acceleration, what we have in the slides are the way the elements of the management system really should be designed. So you can start to think about this from a systems point of view, and it becomes pretty clear what it is, how you want to try to set this up as an organizational competency. So then incubation, the longest time horizon of all of these competencies. So it takes a long time to figure out which of the opportunities in this domain are the most important, the first ones to lead to, the ultimate ones, and how do you pivot? How does the business model need to play out? Is it actually going to be financially viable? So there's so much work to be done in the world of incubation. So it's all about these different kinds of experiments. But the job is to create options for our company's future. Give the company options for growing these new businesses. Create first customer partner relationships, initial revenues, MVPs, all of those kinds of things, and constantly checking the organizational uncertainty to make sure that as we're learning about how the market wants this, is our organization willing to accommodate that? So there's all kinds of work to be done about that. You have your discovery work that's being done, and as it becomes really exciting, we start to vet those opportunities in incubation. Each of these is a little project. Each has a project leader. The project leader is trying to manage technical, market, resource, and organizational uncertainties. And as they do, some of them start to become much more exciting, and others, we're not learning much, it's not really going anywhere, so we thin that portfolio in that way. And over time, what happens is within this opportunity domain, a strategy begins to emerge. And so that's when we would move to acceleration. But the people who work in incubation need help. They're so in the weeds, they're so in the details of their particular experiment that they're running. They need some coaching. We know that. They need people to help facilitate and broker relationships for them, because you have to reach to markets you don't know. They need some nurturing because so much of what they do results in failure. And so we saw a number of people talking about how to give people a sense of the value of what they're bringing back to the company, especially since every time they run an experiment and it doesn't result in some big, huge promise, but their colleagues that entered the company with them from the same MBA program, for example, keep getting promoted. And so it is a real difficult situation. And that's another problem that we need to fix. Okay, so that's the management system elements for incubation. And then finally around acceleration, it's all again about building a critical mass now of sales and operations infrastructure, getting our market presence known out there, and developing your management team, and start to move to the level where you would be able to meet the expected metrics in an operating unit environment. So we want predictable sales forecasts, acceptable yields, and while we don't have to be at huge profit margins when you move into an operating unit out of acceleration, you have to be getting close, right? Or else the business unit just cannot support that. And what we found, the reason we had to call this one out as its own separate competency is because nobody seems to have a responsibility for doing this. I mean, the business units are supposed to grow businesses, but their primary job is to return profit back to the company. So they cannot make the kinds of investments that we've seen these kinds of new stream businesses require. And so that's been a very tricky part. Okay. That orchestrator has to be thinking about the DIA system. So there's a set of activities that manages all the linkages and the interfaces within discovery and incubation and acceleration portfolios. And there are metrics that you would manage and look at the portfolio level, just as if you're a venture capitalist. You know, is your churn rate, you know, the extent to which we're cycling through projects and learning? Is that meeting the objectives you want? Are you managing the pacing of the projects well? There's a whole host of things. And so that in and of itself, it's kind of like you need a chief operating officer of the strategic innovation function that is monitoring all this and making sure it's all working smoothly together. These little phrases in red are quotes from different companies, different people and companies that we interviewed. And, you know, it caused us to kind of create a slide like this. Because, you know, you can diagnose, well, if they're having these problems that they're telling us, what does that mean about their DIA system? And so it was quite interesting, you know, these are R&D people telling us, you know, we can't, we've got great stuff, you know, but we can't get heard in our organization. So that organization had a lot of investment in discovery and in R&D per se, but no incubation and no acceleration capabilities. Or over here, we have big ideas that are incrementally executed. This was from a consumer products company, spent a lot of money on research, but they would take the single most obvious product out of a potential breakthrough business and just send it straight over to the line of business, who would just under leverage the innovativeness of it and create the next product and the next incremental innovation, and then all the rest of the technology and business platform would be lost. So they said we have big ideas that are incrementally executed. So each of these is kind of a case, if you will, of what can happen if you're not thinking about it and treating this whole thing as a system. And then this final thing, I know these are kind of hard to swallow. All we're trying to represent here is that while you're having discovery and incubation and acceleration, it's all kind of guided by this work that senior leaders need to do, which is to develop the domains of innovation intent, or what some companies call strategic buckets. You know, what are we trying to be in 10 years? What are the major problem areas that we want to focus our resources on? So, you know, one company in the Netherlands, DSM, that we studied, they go through this domains of innovation intent process about every 5 years with senior leaders and really focus on particular problem areas. And then that guides the investments of where the discovery team is looking for opportunities. That becomes a domain. And so now you set a team off on, you know, one was advanced solar, another was white biotech. They've got these kind of interesting labels. And those teams are examining and in the field learning from the people who are at the leading edge of those technology spaces and finding opportunities. And over time, those domains can become the next new stream businesses. All right, everybody still with me? Nice long. So I'll try to kind of finish up more quickly. Just to show you that from the scholarly perspective, so by this point in time, we'd probably been at this research for 10 or 12 years. And I was beginning to get new partners to come in, new academics coming in with different skill sets. And we had now more of these concepts in our head. And now it's like, how do you start to test them and be able to show them in different ways? So one colleague at RPI, really great econometrician from the marketing field. And so what he and I did together was we looked at the effect on a company's firm market value, meaning their stock, you know, some mechanism of their stock price. Tobin's Q is the economics term. What happens to that stock market price when, for companies who have a lot of R&D, but some direct it more towards applied research and some more towards exploratory research? And then what about if they have some signal on their website that we could have found through secondary data of an incubation capability? And so we did have a chance to collect that data. And I find this kind of thing so difficult because the measures are so crude, the proxy measures really don't get at it. But we could find among the senior leadership team, people who had the term incubation or innovation in their job title. We read all kinds of ads about these companies, and then we had a lot of financial data, and we had a lot of data about their patent portfolio and the extent to which it was an exploratory kind of patent, new science, or that it was a more applied kind of research. And so we were able to collect data on 141 companies for a 10-year time period. And we have, a lot of these various models that we ran using that data. But let me just kind of quickly interpret for you what the results are. So this is published in R&D Management. What we find is that everything else equal, the more you invest in applied R&D, the better it is for the stock price in applied R&D. So things that are going to really help with our current customers. The exploratory R&D, coupled with the presence of an incubation capability, are positively and strongly associated with increases in firm market value, in stock price. But if you have exploratory R&D and no incubation, there's no effect. And if you have incubation without an investment in exploratory R&D, there's no effect. So it's that combination that's really important. And also we tracked, how many breakthroughs had they had in the past? And past experience did make a difference until you started to add exploratory discovery and incubation. So it was almost sheer luck, but you can increase your firm market value by adding those capabilities. And in the United States, I don't know about in Brazil, but in the United States, what we keep seeing is a decline in investments in corporate R&D budgets, because everything's going towards open innovation and working with startups. So our paper, and then there's a paper in the Strategic Management Journal also, that is basically drawing the conclusion that rather than divesting in R&D, what we need to be doing is adding the innovation capability that I'm talking about here. The rest of discovery, the commercial side, and the incubation and acceleration. So we're wasting a lot of our R&D funds that we're investing, not because we're not coming up with good science or breakthrough possibilities. We're just not building out the businesses. So that's what that study shows. We also were able to do a survey. It's kind of a small sample of our IRI members, and we looked at how kind of some of these elements of the management system and the discovery and incubation, the incubation and acceleration capabilities made a difference in breakthrough innovation success. So we used PLS, which is good for small samples, kind of in a like a structural equation situation here. But basically, again, you see a lot of numbers with a lot of significance values to it, where the outcome is success in terms of increased competencies and increased commercial output from R&D. You see, we look at incubation processes and what we'll call acceleration processes here. And then we'll see from what the personnel policies, the performance measurements, and the link to management strategy, those kind of structural components, and all of that, over here, what the leadership commitment is to innovation. And so let me just flash forward to interpret what we're seeing here for you. The management system approach, leadership plus policies plus the capability development, those columns, explain 43% of the variance in breakthrough innovation outcomes for those companies. That's an enormous amount of the variance, especially for such a small sample. So that number is here, the 43. Okay, that's the weight of the R-squareds going in here. Incubation capabilities explain more than the acceleration processes. They explain more of the variance. So they're more influential in breakthrough innovation outcomes than acceleration is. And yet incubation is the most absent in companies today. So that's very important finding here. So that's this 49 or 50% on the incubation versus about the 16% of variance explained, that weighting leading to RI success. Commercialization or acceleration capabilities are more heavily impacted by personnel policies, how we manage that talent, than by strategic levers, how committed senior leaders are. So how to manage entrepreneurial talent in organizations is key, but there are no career paths for innovation personnel. And then leadership's commitment and provision of strategic direction turns out to be significantly important, which it would not be a surprise. So it's nice to be able to sort of come up with these things in a qualitative world and then test them through surveys and then through these crude proxy measures of econometric models. All right, so these are sort of the scholarly, the phenomena that we've kind of examined, and then also the approach in terms of theoretical contributions has mostly been around thinking about systems. It's not just a process. It's not just about a culture. It's all those elements of a management system that have to be aligned to work to affect those outcomes. Okay, so I got about another 10 minutes and then we should be able to stop. So I mentioned to you that the skills and talent development was the part out of phase 2 that turned out to be the most challenging. These people suffered, if you will, in terms of their career progress in comparison to R&D people or in comparison to, say, product managers in an operating unit. And what we saw is all kinds of really cool new job titles. People were making up their own business cards, their own titles, and handing those off to us. I just heard, what was the other one? I heard this morning in a conference I was in. Oh, one guy had a job title that he called himself innovation irritant, like annoying person. That was on his business card. So people could just make stuff up. And it's kind of this cowboy mentality of, we're going to do what we want. We're entrepreneurial and all that whole kind of thing. But the fact of the matter is none of these were institutionalized as jobs in an organization chart. HR didn't hire innovation irritants, right? And so when the person who was doing this work left the company or went on to a different role, nobody was hired to replace that person. So all of a sudden you had this big gap in terms of the work to be done. And people who were in these jobs told us, I have to cycle out of this job if I want to get a promotion. And if I really do want to be influential in this company, I'll never get to vice president in an innovation role. That's a very, very rare possibility, and primarily because the groups are pretty small. So we collected up everything that we learned in phase 3 by interviewing all these different people who were engaged in this work of new stream creation. And we said, well, what do you do for your job? And what are your performance measures? And how's your career been? And all this. And we were able to bucket, kind of collect, categorize what the challenges were that these people face into these 4 areas. Role definition. The roles are not clear. There's no job descriptions that are well written. There was one company that wrote some job descriptions and it's mostly for discovery people. So they're not legitimized in their organizations. So nobody knows how to assess what their capabilities are or what they should be doing next. And they don't even necessarily have bosses. I mean, they have bosses that are kind of irrelevant to their jobs, don't know much about what they do. And so what they tended to do was stay on these projects and help to nurture them along. And as the project became more and more mature, the person's responsibility just kept expanding, oftentimes beyond what the person was capable of doing or what they had passion for doing. Then there's a whole host of challenges around, how do we select people? You know, if I'm building a team for some breakthrough that I think I have, and I'm an R&D person, how do I decide who to put on the team and where do I find them? So mostly the R&D directors are putting on, oh, I need a physics person, I need a life science person, or a materials person. And whatever I put on the team, that's the way they're going to take the project. And then nobody knew how to get a new business development person on there or what that should look like. So what they do is hire kind of young MBA students who hadn't really worked in the company before. They were junior people with a lot of energy and a lot of passion who would go out into the field. And some companies did that for a while, but most of them said that we really need mid-career people who know how our company works, know where to go get information as necessary. So they really were struggling with what those selection criteria are. And then in terms of developing people, there's no real roles. There was no real career paths. We don't know how to measure their performance. And so, totally frustrating. And then finally, because of all of that, there was really no way to institutionalize this function through people. And so we didn't really have a systematic approach to innovation roles. So it was quite interesting to us, but, fascinating, because I think here we can really be of help, as academics in even identifying this problem. And when I talk to people about it in industry, they're all nodding their heads like, yeah, that's kind of been my career, And so they'll tell us, we did some interviews of the people that we started phase 3 with, and then we went back at the end and we said, how many of you are still in your same jobs? How many of you have left the company, and all that kind of stuff. And we found all these kinds of statistics that were not that unusual, that after about 3 years, about 17% of people had left their company. That's not an unusual turnover rate, especially in US companies. Only 14% had been able to move into a different innovation-related role. But of those who left the company, this was the one that hurts people when they see it. Almost all of them were working in an innovation job for another company. So the people who want to stay in innovation would rather leave the company and work for a competitor than take a different job in a business unit. And so what we're doing is we're really losing this kind of rare talent by not recognizing it and not treating these people, with sort of traditional career development methods. So the implications are, from an employee perspective, like, why would you get into one of these roles? It's very risky. There's all kinds of reasons that you're going to get the pink slip, you're going to get laid off. They become sometimes cynical, disillusioned. But for the company, it's even worse, because now we don't have a way of getting better at breakthrough innovation. If our people leave and we're not able to value the experience and the expertise that they evolve as they continue to practice this. And so the outcome is a lot fewer breakthroughs than we could have in place. So what we ended up doing was tracing here each of our companies and the people that we talked with in phase 3. The color coding here, each color represents a company, and each of these is a person. And we aligned this with our concepts of discovery, incubation, acceleration at the opportunity level, the domain level, and the portfolio level, just to see. And, we could only fit so many on a slide, but we had a look at all of the companies. There were 12 companies in the third phase. And what we find is that there's times when one person spans all of it, or you have a lot of people doing the same thing and other parts are completely uncovered, not covered. The work is not being done. And then there are companies that had, huge gaps in the coverage of things being done. And one of the people that we interviewed more than once said, we're putting them in monstrous roles. you know, as I think about what these people have been doing to try to make these projects work, and it also means they stay on a project for a very long period of time. And so there's not a real way to get promoted if your project has been incubating for 5 years, right? You're not showing growth in sales and all those sorts of things. So we put together a framework where we could describe what the work to be done is in each of these areas. And we started to give them names, labels of what these jobs would be. And that's what the whole third book is about. It describes the roles, it describes the tasks and activities, describes what those people are accountable for. It describes characteristics of those people and helps us identify the selection criteria for them. What are some of the critical experiences that they've had that they've been able to really bring and have contributed to their effectiveness in these jobs? And so again, we are imposing this framework based on the gaps that we've seen in the data that we've collected. We also, when we present this, a lot of times the industry people will say, this is crazy because it's way too many new roles. It's going to be too costly. It's overhead. It's not all revenue generating. It's not the business units. There's no way I can do that. Oh, and by the way, we also have, this is an expanded view of all the support roles that we saw as necessary, which we don't have time to go into. But again, they're all described in the Beyond the Champion book. So there's two ways to go at this. You can squish it, which is, for example, if you don't have too many domains, you know, you don't really need the whole portfolio. It's just one domain that we're working in as we get started. I'm working right now with a company that's going to start with one domain. So fine, you know, you don't need that whole portfolio level approach to begin with. And then you can squeeze. So frequently when companies start, they won't have all of those roles played by different people, but they'll take the people who are starting with the project and have them stay on it through incubation. So we call it dincubation, you know, put discovery and incubation together. And while those people are different, they're more similar. The discovery and incubation people are more similar than the incubation and acceleration people. So I think that this is the safer approach, and it's the one that most companies are using. So there's a lot more that we could go through here, but I think, Mario, we should stop. Everybody, you know, I've got a lot more on how you retain people and career development and all that kind of stuff, but I think probably pretty saturated right now. So let me just stop here and see if, if there's some questions or discussion that we'd like to have.
Okay. Thank you, Gina. There are some questions people sent to me, but I would like you guys, if you have a question, you could ask directly to Gina, okay? And in the meantime, there is a very integrating question on incubation related to say, traditional innovation. The question is, do you think incubation is almost a mandatory step to strengthen a concept for an innovation? Even some well-positioned concepts would be benefited by some uncertainty mapping before acceleration. You know, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think anytime you get beyond your exact current customers with a customer request, the uncertainty starts to come in play. And I think that's why we were moving more towards these agile processes, you know, where you try something, you do the minimum viable product, yeah, as quickly as you can, and confirm some of these uncertain, you know, these expectations that you believe the market has. A lot of times people will say they want something, and then when they have to pay for it, they won't. So I think, though, in those business units, the whole idea is to be as efficient and as low cost of the process as possible. So the thing is, how do you do this very quickly? And when you know that the market is there and you can go straight to them, those experiments can be done pretty quickly. If you really took a whole kind of learning plan, incubation approach to the traditional things, it tends to be overkill. So finding a way, it's a great question, but I think that that's what we're doing. There are companies that now talk about using loose stage gate or more agile processes, and I think that's exactly, you know, what you're mentioning. Companies are beginning to do a little bit more of. Yeah. When you start to get into organizational uncertainty, it's a whole different ballgame. On
the human relations side, human relations systems, we have discovered that Embraer has set a new policy, human relations policy, for innovation managers. We are setting an interview with the human relations people to understand a bit, but as far as we understand by the first talks, these guys are not evaluated anymore annually, for instance, as all the managers, okay? Huh. But we still don't know how does it work.
Okay. So you know what they're not doing. Yeah. You know they're not evaluating them annually, but you don't know how often.
How, yeah, that's it. So we have some very loose figures because well, we didn't talk to the guys that has set up the system. It's quite new, and even the innovators, the managers don't know exactly how will it work, but they are liking the idea anyway. You know, because Embraer is quite a special company because people don't used to leave Embraer. Embraer used to send people out, but people don't used to, by option, go to another job because, you know, what Embraer does is quite unique in Brazil. 2,000 engineers and so on, so they love it. So we will see in I hope in 1-2 weeks, we'll have an interview with this guy. It's actually is a woman responsible for the human systems. I have already sent a mail, and we are trying to see.
That'll be really. I mean, at least they're considering alternatives.
Yeah.
You know, if you could get an innovation leader to be more evaluated on what is happening in their portfolio of all their opportunities, you know, and I don't know what, if annually you'd look at it or what, but that's one quote that I just gave a talk this morning to a group in England, and I had other different kinds of data out there, but one quote that I came across from our data was, we have to quit evaluating these people on the basis of a project success. We should start to think about people as having their own project portfolio. So if 5 out of 10 of the projects that they're working on have moved forward, that may be a really good record in, you know, like discovery or incubation. So I really thought that was, it was a great insight. The company did not adopt that practice the way as I learned, but maybe Embraer will be thinking more along those lines.
Yeah. There are a lot of questions here. I'll try to organize it. But there is one regarding the frontiers, to say, between strategic innovation and digital transformation. Because, well, you know, digital transformation now, it's it's on the mood. And some companies are linking under the same VP, for instance, both strategic innovation and digital transformation, although it's quite there. In my view, they are quite different. What do you think of it?
Yeah,
in the meantime, I will collect the other question, okay?
Okay, I think of the whole, Industry 4.0 and digital transformation and AI. I think of that as what we'll call a general purpose technology. It's a new enabling technology, and we're finding it's growing quickly. It's developing rapidly in terms of many different ways one could use it. But, there's going to have to be a way that it's almost like a change management situation where our company has to move to digital. We hear that all the time, and we have to find ways of using AI and it's almost to one mechanism. When you think about it as an enabling or a general purpose technology, is how does this help us do our business better, right? And I remember maybe 15 years ago when the field of nanotechnology was brand new. And in R&D, everybody was talking about nanotechnology and it was going to lead to this, that, and the other thing. Well, it turned out that it's just that everybody kind of learned about nanotechnology and it became the next new kind of approach that we used in terms of understanding physics, so, particle physics and that kind of thing. So, but the thing also though, so there's transforming your business and making your business better as a result of this. So we have to adopt this technology throughout our company and move things forward, make those transitions. And then in the strategic innovation group, now we can start to think about what new opportunities does this open up for us that we've not been able to see or think about before? I mean, it's two-pronged. I mean, because there can be digital transformation and artificial intelligence and machine learning that would not be a domain of innovation intent. But when you've got a domain of innovation intent, now those technologies could open up a whole variety of new use cases that you'd not really been able to consider before. So it's two parts. One is it's general purpose technology. We got to make our company better as a result of adopting this technology wherever we can. And that should be managed by one group of people, right? Like, I don't know, innovation process kind of people. And then the strategic innovation group is thinking about how does this open up new opportunity spaces for us? Yeah.
Okay, there's a question by Ana Paula.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you very much for this amazing presentation as always. So it was really, really interesting. I have a question here that is much related to this long-term research that you were able to conduct with this group for so long time. And you said that the group, this three phase, you covered first the corporate level, then the project level, and then the individual level. And for moving forward from here, in which areas do you think there is a greater need for research in radical innovation management?
Well, I have a whole other set of slides about research questions going forward. So I'll send those to you because there's so many, and we can break it down in that way. Ana Paula, I think at the individual level, there seems to be a lot of interest right now. This whole issue of talent management just seems to be waking up now. So that's one area. But another one that I'm intrigued with, and I probably will not get involved in this, but there's industry differences in how innovation works. And I think that studying the industry of financial instruments, how does innovation happen in the financial instruments that we launch as new product offerings out there? There is no regulation. There is no incubation. Somebody dreams it up and works on an algorithm to see how much money a wealth management firm could make out of this. And these things turn out to have huge consequences in the financial markets. And so I've never really thought about that before. It's always been a little bit scary, but as I've moved over to Babson from RPI, there's a lot more exposure to insurance companies and investment broker houses and those sorts of things. And they're all struggling with, well, the insurance companies are struggling with how to do innovation, but the finance companies, they just do stuff. And I think that starting to bring some attention to that industry, and it's not necessarily about regulation, but shouldn't we be trying some of these things in a small way before you just launch it into a market where you have no idea what the consequences are going to be? Like the 2008 financial crisis was all because of the way they decided to start to package up mortgage lending, and there was no regulation associated with that. Or what just happened with GameStop. I don't know if you see that now, individuals can just buy and sell stocks, and they can do it and just communicate with one another, and everybody decides to buy a stock. Dogecoin is another big thing, all the whole thing around Bitcoin. Geez, these are all huge innovations, and we have no idea of the consequences of those because they're not managed as if they're innovations. So to me, I find that is a huge area that I think if we started to work together with our colleagues in finance, it'd be quite interesting. We could learn what they think about in terms of innovation, and they could learn about management of innovation from us. So
that's great. Okay. And I have a student that is finishing his graduation and is just writing his TF final work. And he's in a big bank, in a big multinational bank. He was trying to do something like that. And he just received an answer as no from his compliance group. That no, you can't explore this. So that's the other part of it. Yeah, so we have to do something together. It's true.
Yeah. I think that would be really interesting. Yeah, and you could imagine getting some government agency attention onto this. Because
I know some financial companies have a very well structured process of product development, stage gates like it works for traditional projects, and it's like an industry. It's very, very interesting in that sense. Yeah. For instance, even Banco do Brasil, it's a state-owned bank. They have this system to launch financial products, credit cards, and so on. But
so who comes up with things like how a hedge fund works, or all the derivatives, puts and calls, and now you can have derivatives on the basis of solar energy, and all this kind of stuff. And now we've completely decoupled cash transaction coins from a banking system, with the Bitcoin thing. It's just, where are those innovations coming from? And I don't think they're coming from a bank. Mario, they're coming from maybe large investment banking companies where there's just a bunch of mathematicians inside, figuring out how to make more money.
And here in Brazil, fintechs are growing.
Yeah.
We have, there is a bank, it's a bank, including it was founded by two guys. One of them, it's a girl, made his studies with us, and they funded a fintech. Now it's very well succeed. It's Nubank, and it's growing, and all the big banks are looking at the system. But there is a question, Gina, thinking of sectors. What could you say on innovation management in the public sector? There's a question on it. Which elements of the framework would have to be adapted for an understanding of radical innovation outside the private sector? Do you have any experience or any thoughts about it?
Well, there's so many elements of the public sector. So I have worked with the U.S. Air Force. They've tried to develop an innovation capability using this model. There are universities that are trying to use this model that I'm talking with now, where the university will have not just an educational mission, but other aspects of mission. And so I haven't had too much experience. I've had like our roles, self-assessment tool that I was describing, where you can take this little quiz and find out which of these innovation roles that I identified you might be most aligned with. I've had one county in the Netherlands, County of Public Works, go through that just as a beta test of the tool. But country by country, and even region within a country, there's so much difference in the relationship of government to the marketplace and how they want to think about innovation. So like that Department of Public Works, there's no innovation that they're interested in or motivated by, but there are places where they really are. And I generally, like for startup environments, for family-run businesses, for smaller and medium-sized businesses, for public organizations, what we have seen is that if you take kind of the principles of what we've found and you apply those principles into your organizational context, you have to kind of customize depending on how many politics there are. So how big is the organizational uncertainty component, for example? What elements of the management system are more important in some of those sectors than others? How do you get a commitment to a domain of innovation intent? All the how you do it will need to be customized, but the principles tend to resonate across, various types of organizations. So
there's a question on resources. That is the innovation function. They have they manage a portfolio, but the resources to develop the projects are in other parts of the company. How does it work?
Okay, so the prescription that we've come to is that each domain of innovation intent, there should be a seed pot of money given to the domain leader in discovery, and let them try and let them use their teams to go ahead and populate what all the possible opportunities are in that domain. You don't have to have approvals for all that stuff, right? It's a seed pot, and then if you've got 3 or 4 domains, that's the amount of money you're investing. You as the company are investing in discovery, and that those teams are dedicated to that domain, and it might be a team of only 2 people, not very many. And then in incubation, the types of experiments that you're going to go through as you go through the learning loops and the discovery-driven planning, those are the processes that we would use in incubation. The funding can be dosed by experiment. Some experiments won't take any money at all. Some will take longer time and longer budgets. But we need to be, and sometimes what I find is that companies use their funding to buy the time of a person in a business unit if they can. That's always a little difficult because, the boss in the business unit can always say this person's not available, so you don't get the best talent. So what we'd like to see is a core team that is full-time dedicated, and that, as you can reach in for answers to questions and all that kind of thing, and some funding that trades hands, that's fine. But a lot of what we see in incubation is contracted with outside experts. If you need, like, for example, to do prototype building and you can't get attention internally, you use a little bit of the money to work with the contract research house to do that. You don't want to be hampered by organizational politics every time you have to make a purchase, you know. So, and then when it comes time for scaling and we start, you know, as the incubation, as the emergence strategy is becoming clearer and we start to see this could really fit in business unit X, now your innovation council is going to be starting to incorporate the conversations with the president of that division and say, here's what's happening, and here's how we as a company need your division to start to move to be able to incorporate that. So that those conversations happen at a very senior level. And as now we begin to need to share resources, that happens because the Innovation Council is making sure that that happens. So it's kind of an interesting dance between staying separated for a long time, but connected at the strategic level.
Gina, let's make a final block of questions, but I would like the people to ask directly, okay? So Rafael, Tafelli, and Achilles would like to ask a question.
Achilles,
Rafael,
do you mind if I go first?
Go on,
please. So Gina, I would like to know, I know that some classic empirical studies from the 90s used to claim that successful innovative firms usually are more loosely structured, especially during the initiation phase of the development process. And in the end, they evolve to a more formal structure. I know that a lot has changed from the 90s to now, and you've been researching this for a long, long time, and you just show us an ideal structure for innovation that should be more hierarchical, let's say that way. What you assign as the main reason for this change in all those years when you compare your research today from those classic studies?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that question. I always get a question like, why would you introduce hierarchy into innovation that's exactly opposite of what everybody is saying to do? And actually, the reason is because, you know, if you have these kind of quick, agile task teams or new product development teams, that's the way like 3M does it, for example, and these Google, these sorts of things. They can get innovation maybe done more quickly, and they don't run into they know how to work around the systems. But what we find is that when you do that, you don't get to have the strategic impact. It's very unusual to be able to get the organizational commitment at the end of the day for the kind of new stream that you want to create. You've got to somehow align with a vision of the future for this company, or else you can get all the way through to the time when you really need funding and they're just going to say no, that, you know, it's not really relevant to us. And that's when actually, Rafael, we're experimenting, and this is coming back. I just heard more on this week, of spinning out these companies. Right? So, okay, great. It's a great innovation. It has nothing to do with us. So let's spin it out. We'll retain a minority equity share, and, you know, we'll all get rich. Well, it turns out you never really get that rich on the basis of that. And you have not changed the mainstream company. And I think a difference that I have from a number of other researchers is that they're more focused on the success of the venture, right? And I'm much more focused on the long-term health of the mothership company. The whole idea for us is breakthrough innovation. Its purpose is to help renew and transform the company so that we don't have like the failure of Kodak, for example. You know, you had 35,000 employees worldwide, and now it's down to 5,000 people and a completely different management team. You know, people lost huge amounts of shareholder value, but those families that were so impacted, you know, a lot of waste. Same thing is happening with DuPont. You know, they split it into 3 companies. So So I think it's true. Those like little those teams, heavyweight product teams, and all those kinds of things. When it's pretty clear what we got to do, the goal clarity is high, and you can sort of move out and do that work in a kind of an autonomous way. That's great. But when you're really trying to make a something where we're going to have choice points in the business model, in organizational design, and what it's going to disrupt as far as a certain business unit, for example, those are all elements where you kind of really need to ratchet it up. And so that's why we're calling for these domains and domain leaders to really kind of help develop that emergent strategy of that business. I hope that helps. At least I tried to explain myself.
Yes, thank you so much.
Well, there is a question on Achilles, but I am discussing with Enrique Rosenfeld. It's an outstanding researcher on new product development. She's thinking of the interfaces and the cross-pollinization, to say, between exploration and exploitation structures, how the other sides can benefit from the developments you are talking
Who is that, Mario?
Enrique Rosenfeld. It's from the Engineering School of São Carlos. It's another engineering school in the University of São Paulo, in the countryside, say 250 kilometers far from São Paulo. It's more or less the distance New York, Troy.
Huh. Okay, great.
Yeah. Achilles, take the lead, the last question.
Okay, well, just like the financial industry, in software industry specifically, digital world, internet world, in the past 2 decades, we are seeing a lot of a short-term scenario where I have a lot of companies who don't take too long to create a product and create a breakthrough in the market. And also have really large companies like nowadays, Google, Microsoft, IBM, and so buying a lot of, doing a lot of acquisitions, buying a lot of companies, buying a lot of startups, and also investing a lot of money in R&D and trying to run against all this kind of innovation that can come from nowhere. And I have those 2 different scenarios when I spend a lot of money in a process where I'm gonna spend a lot of time and effort to build a product, and from nowhere, in a short period of time, some company can show up and make a totally new mark, or just, let me say, outshine what a big company are doing. So how I can adapt or analyze a model who can cope with those both scenarios running at the same time?
All right, let me just understand. So how can you develop a model where you're looking, are you talking from a practical perspective or from a
yeah, I'm trying to analyze
data
perspective. Yeah. The real
so you're
world.
trying to develop like a simulation of who would win, or what are you trying to do?
Yeah, how to manage the innovation scenario where I can have those both situations happen.
So, and is this from the perspective of a large company? So how does a large company manage it in their own and also begin to engage with startups to make sure they're not being disrupted? Oh, yeah. You know, so from a simulation, are you trying to work a simulation, for example?
Yeah, at least that's what you need to do in the discovery phase, right? You're creating an idea and trying to simulate what you're going to do, and later in incubation, going to think of something. So,
you know, like in the material that I was just presenting to you, it really is not either or. You know, what you might do is consider, what if the only thing we did was use an open innovation model where corporates were engaging with startups, and that's where all the information was coming in from and the opportunities were coming in from. And that we really, because that's actually what's happening in many companies today, that we're putting a lot of energy into figuring out ways of partnering with startups. but all of the things we talked about with incubation, acceleration, domains of innovation intent, portfolio, they don't have those concepts. They don't have an infrastructure to manage in that way. Or they'll have a corporate venture capital unit or an open innovation unit, and it's completely separated from a new ventures group. I just am working with a company whose name you would all recognize, and that's exactly what they have. A CVC organization that is disconnected from, and they have an incubation group, and they don't even work on the same opportunities. So Achilles, I think that there's a lot of ways that you could model the percent of an innovation budget that is spent through corporate venture capital investment and engagement in open innovation versus the percent that's invested in internal R&D. And then you could add whether or not the company has also invested in developing these incubation and scaling capabilities. You know, that would be kind of a way you might think about a simulation just from that perspective. But there aren't very many companies these days who don't engage with startups. I mean, you should see what's happening in Boston. I mean, it's just incredible. All the companies that have outposts right around MIT and Harvard. And I'm sure that there's similar, you know, setups there right in Sao Paulo. But it's becoming a much more common practice. And I think it's just part of what we do in discovery and in incubation. You know, you have part of what you do from the inside, but there's always got to be these partnerships. I don't know if I answered any of your questions. It's a very big question there. That's worth an afternoon of talking.
Gina, do you still have 5 minutes?
Yes.
Oh, there is one last question, then I'll finish. Okay, Gabriela, please.
Okay. Gina, in your book, you describe that the incubation is a long and winding road. Is the most risky of the 3 building blocks. So why would an average company do an incubation alone and not invest in a startup to incubate with it?
Well, they might, you know, for one project, for one experiment, you would need partners. You might do an equity investment in a startup or simply many companies these days are becoming customers, beta customers of the startup, right? To be able to really use and understand the technology. So our categories of uncertainty, T, M, R, O. So the R is a resource, and the resources require partnerships. So it really, like, again, just the same as with Achilles' question, it's not either or. It's how do you, the main thing is you take these principles of discovery, incubation, acceleration at the portfolio level, and you start to think, how do I actualize them? And partnerships are a big element of that. And so we would not be afraid. The real question is, what would be the terms of the partnership? Are they learning-oriented partnerships where you don't commit to buying the company? Because I've seen companies get in trouble that way. The startup then expects it's going to be bought out and wants big money, and that's not been the expectation. You know, the company just wants an option to buy. So, but I think, you know, companies are sophisticated now on how they develop those partnership agreements.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, guys, I think time is running out. So, Gina, what are we doing now? We have more or less, well, there is the issue we are researching on research, you know about it, on how to feed them the mainstream, the mainstream research. Okay, yeah, we are working on it, but there are also some guys researching on what we are naming the enlarged innovation function. You know, that it's a kind of function, but besides innovation, there is digital transformation, fund, and so on. And they don't know exactly how there will be a kind of ambiguity inside the function. We don't know how does it work. So this is some research that the students are involved in. Another one is quite Brazilian. Is about strategic innovation in commoditized industries. You know, Brazil has a large industry, but it's mostly mostly produces commodities. And some of the, like for instance, pulp and paper, they are doing incredible things. And so we are trying to understand how does it work, because they're commodities, or even chemical industry. And on human resources, that Priscilla is trying to understand these new systems, Embraer and others are trying to set. And there is another, a last branch, but it's led by Lidiane, is how does social innovation work? You know, there is, most of people talks about social innovation. The Journal of Product Innovation Management has launched a special issue on social innovation without defining what social innovation is. So there are some guys working on it. That's it. I'd like to thank you very much for your time. Okay.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's been fun having this discussion. I hope your brains aren't just completely, you know, melted from all the slides. But it's interesting to hear what you're working on. There's a lot of work going on in these areas, and we still need it, you know. Yeah. And by the way, Mario, the Babson has a center for social innovation. So
where?
At Babson College.
Okay.
And and there's not a lot of academic work affiliated with it yet, but in terms of connections and access to resources, and the woman that runs it is just so networked really well in terms of like the sustainability development goals and all of those kind of big, larger global problems. She may be able to help, you know, get access to people that you'd like to know, to interview and that kind of thing. So
the only center I knew was in England, in UK, the rest of Surrey. But well, they mix innovation with other things. But anyway,
this is called this. Is it a center or an institute for social innovation? And Babson has 7 centers and institutes, and so that's one.
Have a look.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you all for your patience and listening, and
thank you for
best of luck with your work. Okay. Bye, Mario. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ok, meninas, podemos parar aí com a transmissão. Eu não sei se a Cristiane está aí, acho que sim, né, Cristiane?
A gente está encerrando, professor.
Ah, beleza, ótimo.